looking good. Thank you. She's a plant. Yeah. Well, today we look at the empty tomb. And I'll just say, what an amazing day. I recently came across a statement that said this. It said, the stone was not rolled away from the entrance to the tomb so Jesus could get out. He could have left easily without moving the stone. And we see that that is true that Easter evening, where the disciples were meeting behind locked doors. And suddenly, Jesus is standing there among them. And also how in Luke's account, Jesus suddenly disappears after breaking bread with the two men who were on their way to Emmaus. And so the resurrected Jesus didn't need the tomb opened for him to get out. The statement continues by saying it was rolled away so others could peer in. That we humans might see and know the truth for ourselves. You see, it was a gift to us. And that first Easter morning, there were a number of people who took the time to peer into that empty tomb. We see that Mary Magdalene peered in. We see the Apostle Peter peered in. And we see that the Apostle John peered in. And this peering in by these disciples, coupled with Jesus' later appearances to them, they would never be the same again. I mean, in wondrous ways. Did this in fact happen? Well, let me just say this morning that in the events of Holy Week, the days just prior to this, we see that the disciples had a great fear of death. Again and again, they chose their own safety rather than standing up for Jesus. And I think we can understand that. I mean, what would each one of us be really willing to die for? I mean, to actually give your own life. I mean, people can easily talk big, but I mean, really, what would you be willing to give your own life for? And yet, after this event that we celebrate this morning, each one of the disciples gave their life in defense of the truth of this event. That Jesus did indeed rise from the dead. And that he appeared to them. And all of them had to do to live was to say it wasn't true. The difference about their martyrdom over against others is that it was based on something they had personally witnessed. You see, they knew whether it was the truth or whether it was a lie. And they chose to die for this. What's so interesting to me is what had so frightened them just days before, death, no longer seemed to frighten them. Death no longer seemed to frighten them. And that should make us stop today and think. This morning is our opportunity to take a moment and peer into that open tomb again. And that's what we're going to do. I want to start by saying in Jesus' first appearance to his disciples on that Easter day, that Easter evening, Jesus twice says to them, "Peace be with you." But what peace does Easter give us? For those of us who struggle with how we've lived our lives so far, who are in some way haunted by our past choices, it's by peering into that empty tomb that we can now know that we are indeed forgiven. You see, if God's plan had stopped with the crucifixion, then it wouldn't be clear what his death meant, if anything. We might see it as just a terrible but meaningless injustice. But you see, the empty tomb, coupled with Jesus' appearances, shows us clearly that Jesus' death and resurrection was not meaningless at all. Rather, Easter is proof that it was all part of God's purposeful plan. The empty tomb shows us that Jesus' death means our sins are gone. They're gone. You see, in Jesus we can know that all of our wrongs have been righted. Even Peter, who had denied Jesus, was cleansed. I find it so neat that in Mark chapter 16, verse 7, Mark records that one of the two angels that we see today in that tomb say this: "Now go and tell his disciples, including Peter." See, God wanted Peter to know, and he wants us to know, that Jesus' death was not a disgrace, but grace. And so, like Peter, as we peer into that empty tomb and we see the risen Jesus, we can be sure that Jesus' death has indeed cleansed us and continues to cleanse us. And so through the empty tomb, God gives us that peace. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's God's warm-up. For all of us who might be concerned about what is happening in the world right now, and you have a sinking feeling that evil is winning, all we have to do is take a step back to the events just prior to Easter. You see, what we see in the events prior to Easter is evil seemed to get their way, with no one able to stand in their way. Evil seemed to be an unstoppable force. And those attacking Jesus did everything they could to stop him. And God's good plan for us. I mean, consider for a moment all they did to stop Jesus. I mean, don't you think they were off to a good start by having him murdered? Next. But they were far from done. They surely didn't stand in the way, and I'm not saying they should have because it was the way things were done back then, but they didn't have a problem of a large stone, and based on gravestones at that time, probably weighing around 2 tons, being put across the entrance to Jesus' tomb. In fact, they went to the trouble of making sure that it was sealed by the Roman government. They wanted and they got a cord stretched across the stone of the tomb that threatened anyone who might tamper with what was inside with the Roman Empire. And that meant certain death. And if that was not enough, it was then guarded by a strong military force, at least 16 Roman officers or soldiers. And they would take shifts. 4 would be up, 12 sleeping. Switch, 4 up, 12 sleeping, all through the night. And all this for a corpse. Overkill? I mean, maybe it looks like overkill, but I'll tell you this. You see, they wanted to make sure that that corpse was going to stay right where it was. For they knew that Jesus had promised that he would rise after 3 days. Matthew records a conversation those against Jesus had with Pontius Pilate. They told him, "Sir, we remember what that deceiver once said while he was still alive. After 3 days, I will rise from the dead." So we request that you seal the tomb. And Pilate replies, "Take guards and secure it the best you can." So they sealed the tomb and posted guards to protect it. And yet I ask you this, what does that empty tomb show us about God's plan for us? Up against the powers of evil. See, on that Easter, Jesus made it look like child's play. Right? I mean, like child's play. To undo what seemed to those against Jesus and everyone else like their perfect plan to stop him. Well, how does that bring us peace now in our times? Because we can not only have hope that things will work out in these times that we live, but we can have what the Bible refers to as a confident hope. You see, the empty tomb shows us that our victory in Jesus is not wishful thinking. The empty tomb shows us that it's not a high-risk bet. Rather, the empty tomb shows us that our victory in Jesus is certain. It is certain. You see, no matter what evil tried that Holy Week to foil God's plan, I mean murder, a 2-ton stone, governmental might, a strong military force on their side, it didn't stand a chance against God. When God was ready to act, it was an easy fix. When God was ready to act, it was an easy fix. And so even in the midst of much that is dark in our times, granted, we can have a confident hope. We can have peace. For the empty tomb clearly shows us that evil is no match for God. Well, I've talked about our past, I've talked about our present. What about our future? For those of you who are troubled by what looks to be a wasted life, or for those of you who feel that as you look towards the future, it's a bleak future, you see, the empty tomb and the risen Jesus show that in Jesus, God has given us all the brightest of futures. On that Easter day, Jesus very, very intentionally wants to get a message to his disciples. And he's talking to Mary Magdalene. We see it in our passage today if you want to take a look. He says to her this. He says this. He says, "Don't cling to me, for I haven't yet ascended to the Father. But go find my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." He wants them to see how wonderfully different things are now. You see, rather than needing to craft our bright future, let me say that again, because I think most of the world is bent on this. Rather than needing to craft our bright future, the empty tomb clearly shows us that our wonderful life and future is already laid out for us. It's already laid out for us as part of God's plan for us, his gift. And that we have so much to look forward to, all of us. Our ultimate future is not at all bleak, but bright. You see, without the empty tomb and Jesus' appearances, we might wonder about life after death and how our lives will end. And as we get older, not that I know this or that you know this, but as we get older and the sun starts to go down on our lives, the shadow of death gets longer and longer. On that Easter, Jesus dispels that shadow for us about our futures. And in living color, Jesus shows us. He doesn't just tell us. It's not just let's read it on a book. He shows us what will be the result of death for all who are under God's care. See, you might say, well, you've never seen the dead come to life. You see, today we get to do that. All we have to do is peer into that empty tomb. You see, Jesus' resurrection shows our coming resurrection. As the Apostle Paul writes, but in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. He is the first of a great harvest of all who have died. Paul says he was the first, but he's far from the last. And if any of us who are numbers 2, 3, 4 on want to know what it's going to be like for us, go look at the first one. That's what's going to happen to you. You get to see it in living color. And so Easter gives us an undying peace as we look towards our future. And we're clearly shown that it will end well. Kind of an understatement, right? Well, I'll just end by saying this. So Easter shows us why we can have peace every day and in every situation. That in Jesus we have a righted past. That in Jesus we can have a confident hope in the present times. For evil doesn't have a chance of altering God's good plan for us. It will surely come to pass. And in Jesus we have a bright future that God has already laid out for us. I mean, it's just waiting for us, with no assembly by us required. And so in Jesus, we have peace about our past. We have peace about our present times. And we have peace about our future. And all these things become clear once we peer into this gift of the empty tomb. So happy Easter. And peace be with you. Amen.